Okay, thank you so much to Shinjin and to the team there in Bangalore who have been really great to work with to get this presentation going. And good morning to those of you in India and many parts of the world where it's morning, and to some of my friends and colleagues and family here in Canada, good evening. It's a great honor to actually be part of this webinar series, having been raised in India and having done my schooling and having had the opportunity to work in the private sector there for 2 years between 2015 and 2017. I'm deeply connected to India, and I constantly look for opportunities to collaborate. But I'm even more excited today because when I looked up Shenzhen, one of the things that struck me was that it's an AI and blockchain based a platform which attempts to uh, encourage and drive diversity in the workplace. And I'm a crypto mom, and so very interested in all things blockchain and disruptive technologies. So my pleasure to be here today. I'm going to try and keep my presentation to around 30 minutes on the topic of CSR and social good. And once we're done with that, look forward to the exciting part of most presentations, which is the interactive Q&A. And so without much ado, I just want to move on to what I'm going to try and cover in today's presentation. So just to make sure we're on the same page, when we use the terms like CSR and social good, what do we really mean? And do we have some kind of an agreement on what is it that we mean? I'd like to just focus very quickly on CSR and philanthropy in the Indian context, because each part of the world looks at these issues and does things quite differently. And there might be some cultural, social, political, and economic realities that are quite unique to certain parts of the world. I would like to then move on to speaking a little bit and sharing some insights on corporate giving, which is similar to CSR, and the whole area of social good here in Canada. I then would like to dwell a little bit on the global context. Why should we care? Why should we really be talking about CSR or social good in the midst of a pandemic? One of the topics that I was asked to touch on for today's presentation was to talk about career pathways into the world of CSR, corporate giving, and social good. And so I'd like to call it the careers focused on giving, because that's the common denominator in all of these areas. And then, of course, last but not the least, the Q&A session. So what do we really mean when we say corporate social responsibility? There are umpteen definitions, and they all have some valid elements in it. I quite like the one that I have up here, which is it's basically a management concept whereby companies have to actually try and integrate the social and environmental concerns in their business operations and interactions with their stakeholders. So what this definition tells us is that you have concerns on one side, and then you have stakeholder interest on the other. And then you have business operations that has to come in there and make peace with both sides. When look at, and very broadly speaking, they fall into three buckets: the economic, the environmental, and the social. Now, what is quite interesting about getting deep into the area of CSR is that it's not about just giving. It's not the old-fashioned view of charity, for instance. It's about making sure that the needs and capacities of the business and the corporate social responsibility initiatives or aspirations, that there's actually a fit between the two. The second thing is that which sometimes people don't realize, is that it must not adversely affect the economic viability of a business. If the CSR portfolio is going to hurt the business, or it's going to take away from what the company has assured its stakeholders or consumers, then we're going to have a problem. So what's the difference then with social good? Social good is often linked to social purpose. So if you go back in time, faith organizations, family foundations, large joint families, different groups of people try to do good, either because their religion asked them to, or they believed that that was aligned with their values, or because they wanted to get a tax cut. Whatever be the reason, people have been involved in giving back. to people and giving back to the environment, giving back to communities. But social good, very much like CSR, has now grown into a very important part of businesses. And the organization that I have a connection to here in Vancouver is called the Social Purpose Institute. And they have a definition for social purpose, which they call an emerging trend in business. And what is very interesting about this definition is that they talk about social good as being the engine that powers the business and contributes to a better world. So again, just like CSR, you can see that there's a bridging between what the business does and what we would like to see in this world of ours, or on our planet. So why should a company look at getting involved in CSR or social good? Well, there are many benefits to organizations, and there are also many competitive advantages to organizations. And this is a well-researched topic. People get their PhDs on the topic of CSR. So let's look at some of the benefits. For example, you might have enhanced access to capital and markets. So let's just say that there is a chronic social issue in one part of the world. You have a product that could potentially help in solving that problem, but you've never penetrated that market before. Well, through your CSR portfolio, you might be able to do that and create a bit of a win-win situation. And in a minute, I'll talk about an example in Bangladesh. The other benefit to an organization is the increased sales and profits. Generally speaking, consumers like to do good. And so when they buy something, they always feel good when a part of that cost that they're paying goes into something, whether it's educating a child, whether it's planting a few trees, whether it's teaching coding to young girls. They love to know if there is an extra value add. Then there is the improved brand image. There is the reputation being enhanced, and your customer loyalty also being enhanced. So during the pandemic, I've been reading some interesting stuff, and I'm sure you have too, that many people have continued buying things from certain companies or from certain e-commerce platforms because they believe in them. Even though it's a bit more expensive, they have to wait a bit longer for something, they've decided to still do it because they have that brand loyalty and the customer loyalty, which is very critical. So what could some of the competitive advantages be? Well, there's many, but during pandemics, for instance, it can help you get through some very difficult times. It can also create new and both the brand and be built into something stronger. There are multiple benefits and competitive advantages. One of the examples that Professor Mohammed Yunus talked about when he visited Simon Fraser University a couple of years ago here in Vancouver, he talked about this very interesting partnership between Danone, the yogurt company, and Grameen Bank, the bank for the poor, based out of Bangladesh. Together, they started a yogurt plant in a place called Bogra in Bangladesh. And basically, the funding arrangement was that both Danone and Grameen needs to put in 50-50. And whatever profits that they made gets funneled back into the business. And what was quite interesting about this partnership in Bogra was that they did not want to just do good. They wanted to solve certain chronic, wicked social problems, such as malnutrition, youth issues, unemployment. So through the development of this yogurt plant in Bogra, they were able to address multiple issues, but Danone benefited financially from being a business. It penetrated a market in Bangladesh that it hadn't done before in a significant way. And Grameen Bank continued to stay true to its mandate, or a family foundation. There are many business models, and there's pros and cons to them, but an open-mindedness to these different models and ways of being in this world definitely helps us help vulnerable populations and deal with some chronic issues that we've been struggling to address. In terms of India, what is quite interesting is that most of you in India know that we have the Companies Act of 2013. And in 2014, there was an amendment which basically required companies to spend 2% of their average net profits of 3 years on CSR if they meet one of these three criteria. Now, as you can see from the three bullets that I have on the slide here, companies have to make a bit of money in order to be required by law to provide 2% of their average net profits of 3 years towards CSR. Now, we know a lot of small and medium-sized companies don't make this kind of money, but that does not mean that they're not involved in CSR kind of work. They could be involved in a local infrastructure project. They could be adopting a village. They could be providing funds for flood relief that's very critical in certain parts of the world. So they still would be involved depending on what their wallets can they can afford. However, it's not mandated by the law. Now, when we look within the Indian context, and having worked in India, the company that I worked with in Chennai, Newgen Knowledge Works, also had a CSR engagement. And we see that within the Indian context, and to some extent, global context, some CSR initiatives are more focused on the big picture. Climate crisis, what can we do about it? But some of the initiatives are very local focused. There is a slum, there is a sanitation crisis there, or drinking water crisis, and we need to solve this local problem. So it doesn't matter which way we go with this, because we have all learned that what happens locally, the cumulative effect of many local projects, many local initiatives together make a difference in our global context. And if we deal with a global problem, it trickles down sometimes, or a lot of the times, and it has an impact locally. So some of the examples I just put out here, which I'm sure most of you are familiar, is that some of the CSR initiatives could be eradicating hunger or poverty or malnutrition. Others might want to get involved in preventive health care and sanitation. For some, it's education and gender equality. In the current day and age that we live in, environmental sustainability has become a huge priority for many companies, governments, and individuals. There could also be very specific, like I said earlier, localized programs, for example, supporting slum area development or promoting arts, culture, and language. So, for instance, when we look at indigenous languages, many of the indigenous languages around the world are going extinct or have already gone extinct. Hence, the UN had to declare a year as being the year of indigenous languages so that the elders in the communities could somehow be supported to help that language preservation initiative. And younger people who generally did not learn their indigenous language could be supported to do that. So for instance, in my university at Simon Fraser, we do have indigenous language programs, and we work closely with the local indigenous communities and leadership to try and support language preservation. Making sports inclusive, something that's very near and dear to my heart. The world is created for most part for able-bodied individuals who do not necessarily have barriers, especially physical barriers. And so it ends up with a large number of people who are differently abled or who have invisible disabilities, finding it hard to navigate this world of ours. And sports, we see that in sports. And so it's really important for some companies to put their money in making sports more inclusive. And in many of the countries around the world, including India, adopting villages is a very popular CSR initiative. And what's really great about adopting villages is that you adopt all the problems that's there in that village. So it could be education, it could be when floods come, the households get flooded and people lose all their belongings and earnings, and there's a great deal of stress. It could be, trying to get electricity to the homes, as we have seen during this pandemic. I've been listening to the Indian news channels, and many children have difficulty with digital online learning because they don't have access to Wi-Fi or they don't have electricity. So many communities are being supported to make sure that they have these basic amenities. So one of the areas that I wanted to touch on today is the area of philanthropy, right? Because it's about giving. And there are many ways in which money is given. It could be an individual making a decision to give money that they acquire over their lifetime and through their work or business or acquiring family wealth. Or it could be an organization deciding to give a part of their wealth away. And then what's very interesting within the topic of philanthropy is this whole population called the ultra high net worth individuals, or UNHI. And I think many of you, especially in India, might be very familiar with Mr. Azim Premji, associated with Wipro. Now, what is quite interesting, when I read this report by Bain and Company, it's a report about India philanthropy in 2019, the amount of money that was collected, a great percentage of that actually came from individuals. And when you looked deeper into the amount of money these individuals gave towards philanthropy or for a good cause, what was quite interesting is that 80% of the 55% UHNI contribution came from one individual, Mr. Azim Premji, who, as many of us know, signed the Giving Pledge, which basically meant that he has agreed to give away at least half of his wealth. Now, why is this important while we're talking about CSR or social good or corporate giving? As professionals involved in this field, we are often asked, how can we raise funds? Who should we be talking to? And what strategy should we be using? Unless we understand the research, unless we understand the data, and we understand the analysis behind the data, it's very difficult to decide which market segment you need to go after, or which individual should you be connecting with and building a relationship with, and also what kind of strategies would work for one and not for the other. So in a couple of the next slides, I will elaborate on this a little bit more, but this was a report that had some really, really good, both big picture and very detailed information about what's happening within the Indian context. On the similar lines, here in Canada, I came across a very interesting report that was published in 2018 by this group called Imagine Canada. And what it did was it surveyed a large number of organizations and looked at corporate giving in a changing Canada. So those of us who've been involved in fields like social work or business or working with vulnerable populations know that it's been a struggle as the years have gone by, and especially in the last decade. It's been a struggle to raise funds. And fundraisers have been really, really wondering, what should we be doing here differently? This report was actually quite insightful. What it basically shed some light on is that people no longer think about giving in the old-fashioned way, and companies don't think about corporate giving in the same old-fashioned ways. So what has really changed? Two things that stood out for me was that organizations clearly articulated that you need to drive impact and you need to embed social values throughout the organization while you're engaged in corporate giving. So what does that mean? They don't want to just cut a check. They want to make sure that the impact that this money gets ultimately is measurable. It has a long-term sort of an impact, and the individuals who work for them or choose to be employed with them, that they would also want to carry on with this for a longer period of time. So you're basically trying to fundamentally change the DNA of an organization. The second point that was very interesting was that people no longer wanted impassioned pleas about why somebody should give money. So the old-fashioned ways of saying, come on, aren't you affected and impacted by these children going hungry? You have money, why don't you give the money? Well, that doesn't really work anymore. And that's why some of the very expensive public service ads and other things have not really had much impact over the last few years. Instead, what is having quite a bit of impact is evidence-based decision making. Again, in basic, simple terms, we're talking about data. So if I give you money, what exactly are you going to do with it? How much is going into overheads? How much is ultimately reaching the individual I'm trying to help? And how many middle people are involved here? So they want to really, corporations are looking for evidence-based decision making, and they're looking for strategic partnerships, not something that will just come and go. It's not something that's going to be the flavor of the month, but something that's a long-lasting relationship. I see that in my work in the university. Some of the relationships that the university has nurtured goes back literally 30, 40 years. And some of the partnerships that I've gotten involved with in the last 3 years of being at the university, they actually go back more than a decade. So these are individuals and groups that have made a deliberate choice to engage with the university. And the university has made a deliberate choice to engage with the other person or group because there's an alignment of what we're trying to get out of this partnership, and there is a value-based synergy, and the decisions that we're making is evidence-based. So in a lot of ways then, there are similarities and less differences. I want to just quickly touch on two examples of what corporate giving looks like in Canada, which happens in many parts of the world, including in India. One is the Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup. And what is really interesting about this is a seafood company, Ocean Wise, along with the World Wildlife Fund, have come together to do the Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup. Companies, organizations, individuals across Canada, coast to coast, come together at different points during the year to basically clean up water bodies that are getting polluted with plastics or garbage or other things. And they try to keep the shoreline coast to coast clean. And in the Ocean Wise mandate and in their business plan, you will see that they talk quite a bit about environmental sustainability. So there's a bit of a synergy there. When organizations do a shoreline cleanup, it's a team building activity. It could be a community-based activity. They have a pancake breakfast, or they'll have a coffee and cookies, raise funds, and then give it to these organizations, who then go off to make sure that there is money available to do important work related to the environment. The SFU CAN is a very relatively new initiative at Simon Fraser University, where what we have done is we have started a network. So CAN stands for COVID Action Network. And what we're trying to do here is collaborate with others, working on a response to the crisis and increase, again, our collective impact. So as you can see, there's this theme about what kind of impact are we having. So in the case of SFU CAN, what we do is we bring in individuals from all levels of government, students, faculty, staff at the university. We invite people from other universities, nonprofits, and businesses. And we try to have a conversation about, while we are going through this pandemic, what should we do and what can we do to make an impact? And what we found out in the Lower Mainland, close to Vancouver, where I live and work, is that food security has become a big issue. So one of the organizations that I'm very involved with, United Way of the Lower Mainland, they have basically taken financial help from businesses, from universities, from donors, from families and volunteers. And what they've started to do is have food hubs. So there's, I believe, about 20 food hubs in the Lower Mainland where people, especially seniors and people with different challenges, can get food that is very important for our survival. I just want to quickly go on to the global context because this is one of my favorite topics of conversation. Why should we care? Why should companies care? Why should individuals care? And why should the global community care? Let's take a look. When we could have put 100 and probably 1,000 points on these slides here, because the global context, as we know, is actually quite precarious, whether we look at environment, social, political, or any of the other issues. We live in very trying times. Let's just take a quick look at some of the reports and some of the data that's out there for us to see. For example, if you look at extreme poverty, the World Bank has basically estimated that 40 million to 60 million people will fall into the extreme poverty category in 2020. What does this mean? Individuals will be making less than $1.90 a day, $1.90 a day. And this is going to be aggravated because of COVID-19. In India alone, 330 million Indians will continue to earn less than 10,000 rupees in 2015, even if the current economic rate continues. That's in the Bain's 2018 report that I touched on earlier. Let's look at violence. According to OECD, women killed by intimate partners or family members account for a staggering 58% of female homicide victims. In other words, when women are killed in 58% of the cases, according to this report, it's someone that they're intimately in a relationship with or know really well. In the world's poorest countries, more than 1 in 4 children are already engaged in child labor. And UNICEF has a number of reports on this very serious issue. If we look at issues such as refugees and people who are forcibly displaced, 79.5 million people have been forcibly displaced worldwide in just 2019. And this is the UN CHR 2020 report that talks about it. We all know we are going through some serious uh, adverse effects to our global ecosystem. And the climate change is, I think, one of the toughest, scariest challenges that we're all going to be facing in our lifetime. Last but not the least, mental health is a serious concern. It affects all genders, all cultures, all faiths. People anywhere in the world have mental health challenges, and around 1 billion people globally have a mental health or a substance abuse disorder. And this is according to our World in Data in 2018. So we should care, because the cumulative effect of all of these challenges is not only going to affect businesses or governments, it's going to affect each of us, because we are connected whether we like it or not. And during COVID-19, that is one of the most painful and most important lessons we have learned. Doesn't matter where we are, how we live, how much money we make, how much money we have, we are interconnected and interdependent in one way or the other. So, what happens to somebody in one part of the world, what happens to a country in one corner of the world, is going to have a huge impact on everyone else. One of the topics that I was asked to just touch on very briefly was in the world of, in the space of CSR and social good and corporate giving, what kind of careers can people plan to have or aspire to have, and what should they do about it? I think some of you know my background is in social work. I did my master's in social work from Tata Institute, and I partly completed my PhD in child and youth care at the University of Victoria here in British Columbia. And so my experience, ever since I graduated in 1991, for almost 30 years, has been in that social services sector. And I've had peeks into the world of private sector from time to time, and especially through my pro bono work. And one of the things that I've realized is that when I was growing up and when I accidentally stumbled into the master's program at Tata Institute, I believed, and many people believed, that you needed a degree in social work or psychology or child and youth care to basically be successful and have the skill set and the knowledge and the ability to influence issues and things in the CSR or corporate giving social good space. Well, in 2020, I will say that that's not the case at all. Every single individual has knowledge, skill, ability, and personality, which can lend itself to a career focused on giving. And I just want to touch on one or two things here to drive my point. So if you look at my collection of pictures here, on the very left-hand side corner, a number of individuals, symbolic here, are engaged in activism. And in the world of CSR, corporate giving and social good, that's where the money could go sometimes, is to foster, nurture grassroots activism or different forms of activism, which tries to challenge the status quo and make a fundamental difference in the way the world is structured. We see that, for instance, now with the Black Lives Matter movement. We've seen that with a number of movements in the last several years, which have challenged the dominance of, say, the financial institutions, or has challenged governments in certain countries where democracy still hasn't become a reality. So you can be engaged in this work through that activism grassroots pathway. You might want to be involved in it through the world of conservation and environmental sustainability. It could be working with people who are differently abled, working with seniors, or working with children. So there's many, many pathways. But one of the ones that I want to really touch on to make a very important point, which some of you might appreciate and others might at least give it some thought, is the picture that I have there of the immersive coding classes and mentorship for youth with autism. That's basically an offering by a socially conscious business in Chennai that have been very involved with hashtag code. Now, what hashtag code does is basically bring individuals who have autism to learn coding through a very creative methodology and help them create a pathway of both financial and career independence. And what is quite fascinating about this work in Chennai is that for most of the young men who come to learn coding and are getting mentored, they are brought to the classroom often by their mothers. And many of these mothers have college degrees or they have been working previously. But because they have a child who's differently abled and who has a unique skill set and personality that the world doesn't often understand, these mothers have their careers basically disrupted. So, what Hashtag Code is doing is helping these mothers also learn coding and making those uh, talented individuals then be able to do something in this world that makes a difference in their lives and the lives of other individuals or for corporations who perhaps have a project that needs to be taken care of. The young man there with the unicorn T-shirt is Vitalik Buterin, 26 years old, a brilliant programmer and the founder of Ethereum. And some of you, like me, might be passionate about blockchain and crypto, but bear with me when I explain why this is important. So, Ethereum is basically a cryptocurrency platform, and it's a decentralized open source blockchain. And in order to secure the blockchain, people have to mine on this platform. And these Ethereum miners then are rewarded with basically Ether, which is the cryptocurrency. Why should you and I worry about Ether or cryptocurrency or blockchain? Well, there's actually lots of reasons that we should know about this. If we look at what Buterin did was previously he donated $1 million dollars worth of crypto to help refugees who were struggling in certain parts of the world. Just this month, in June 2020, another donation was made in crypto to UNICEF by the Ethereum Foundation. Now, why should we, as folks involved in CSR, corporate giving, social good, having different jobs and job titles, why should we pay attention to this? Well, just think about Jin. It's a platform that is basically blockchain and AI based. The world is being disrupted. Every sector is being disrupted. And so for us to think that the CSR, corporate giving, and social good space is not being disrupted is very naive. We've not only got to understand all the new things that's happening, we also need to understand new sources for funding. There are people out there who might be waiting to be asked to donate crypto for a good cause. But if we as professionals don't even know the basics of what is blockchain or crypto, or we don't take the trouble to find out, what are the pros and cons of it, we don't understand that by actually having this arrangement with an organization or an individual, we are basically maximizing the chances of this money or this contribution going directly to the person who needs it most without overheads or without middle people. So this is like a new field. I'm just an amateur. I just happen to be very passionate about it. And I have two sons who constantly, patiently teach me more and more about it. But the point I'm trying to make here is when we think about careers, when we think about what we want to do within our own organizations, we need to ask ourselves, what kind of knowledge base do we have? What kind of skills and abilities do we have? And what kind of personalities do we have? I'm extroverted, so I'm advantaged in certain jobs and positions. But if a certain job needs a very introverted, desk, focused kind of a personality, I would probably not be very good at it. So I just want to, share one of the favorite quotes, I think, of many people, including myself. Choose a job you love, and you will never have to work a day in your life. So I'm hoping that many of you here are on this call today because you love the whole career of giving, or you love that space where you're either facilitating the giving, you're receiving the giving, or you're trying to expand that base so that more and more people and more issues can be successfully managed, addressed, and eliminated. You can connect with me through LinkedIn. My Twitter handle is at ShobhanaJM9, and of course through my work email, which is sjmad@sfu.ca. And I really hope that you'll take a second or two to just mull on and reflect on the quote by Anna Frank. Anne Frank, a Holocaust survivor, who said, no one, has been forgiving, right? So let's stop the slideshow and open it up to questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Shubhana. Thank you so much for the session. I think we already have a few questions coming. Are you able to see the questions in the chat box, or do you want me to read it out to you?
Just give me 1 second.
Yeah.
Why don't you read the questions? I think people would love another voice.
Sure. Okay. So we have first question that asks that we see private companies doing their CSR activities. Does it apply for public government-based companies too? Uh, that's the first question. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think it really depends which part of the world we're talking about. I think in the context of India, for example, there are many ministries that have a mandate where they have to look after education or women's issues or environmental issues as part of the ministry mandate. So it may not be called CSR. It just could be the ministry's mandate. They have a budget. Every fiscal year, they get less or more money, and then they carry out their mandate. There might be public institutions that are involved in CSR, but it may not necessarily be part of the mandate. Within the Canadian context, public institutions are involved in corporate giving. So like universities, for instance, and many of the private institutions are definitely involved, but it's not mandated here.
Thank you so much for that. I think we have a next question that asks, do you think the initiatives for environmental sustainability by the corporates in India and other developing nations need to fall into new bracket revised policy to gain more traction? Since we need to act upon climate change more than ever, there seems to be very less attention given to this.
Yeah. So for some of you, I just want to clarify, I actually live and work in Canada, and but I have my roots in India, and I've done some schooling and a little bit of working in India. So I'm not familiar with all the laws and policies and the nitty gritty of this. But generally speaking, I think the concern that you have for India is frankly a concern that is global, right? Because the environmental crisis, the climate crisis is serious. It's happening in the Arctic. It's happening all over the world. So I think overall, different stakeholders, whether it's government, public, private, individuals, I think we all have a role to play. And so the question is not so much who needs to do more or who should be doing more. It's about how can we have the maximum collective impact, and how can we leverage what somebody already has. So I think it's that whole notion of coming together for collective good, for collective security, and for being strategic about how we go about solving some of these problems. I think that would help, whether it's in India or in Canada or in any part of the world.
Right. Uh, we have a question that says, ma'am, is there some study that compares which model is more successful? One second. Is it a state enforced CSR or voluntary work, especially in corporate sector?
Yeah, that's a very good question, right? So I'm a huge believer in being very open-minded. I think when we get positional about things, we often miss out on some really unique value propositions. And it's easier to preserve the knowledge we have than to be curious and learn something new. Right? I'm 52 years old, so I will tell you, it's so much more easier for me to just keep falling back to what I've learned over the years or what I've done. And I believe, if not for my two very young children, university going children, who constantly challenge me and debate with me and share great information with me, I know that I would be struggling with some of the newer ways of doing things. I don't think there is one better model or the best model for this whole giving space that we're discussing here. I think all models have something to offer. And I think what's really important, if you're in the CSR space or you're interested to get involved in it, is to read extensively and to, with an open mind and a critical eye, look at what different people are doing in different parts of the world, right? One individual might have a very capitalistic mindset. Another person might have a very socialistic mindset. Both mindsets, right, are mindsets, and they have a lot of insights to offer. One of the books, I don't have a list in front of me, but if you shoot me an email, I'm happy to share a few more resources. But one of the books written by Professor Mohammed Yunus, I think it's called The Three Zeros, actually talks about some of the examples of how the Grameen Bank and businesses have come together to solve really, really serious issues. Different universities are engaged, in these kind of initiatives. In India, a lot of the foundations, a lot of individuals like Mr. Premji's work in India, and different developers, they have all done different things, and there's so much we can glean for it. And then you have to ask yourself, if you remember one of the early slides, the CSR portfolio and the methodology you choose must make sense for your specific organization, because it has to align with the business goals and the promises that the organization makes to.
Hello, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I'm able to
Yeah.
hear you.
Okay. Sorry. The next question is, good evening, ma'am. This is Preeti Karwal from India. Could you please let me know the programs run by any of the corporate organizations and universities themselves in Canada that support and provide financial assistance to overseas students, particularly those who want to apply master's program in Canadian universities? Many of our students are interested but not able to join in due to such limitations.
Yeah. So this may not necessarily be a pure CSR related question. I think it's more about
Right.
international students studying in Canada.
Correct.
You can shoot me a note, Preet, and I'm happy to share the information. But generally speaking, Canada, like other countries, many great universities, and each of the universities on their websites will have a section called International Students. And if you browse through that, there's quite a bit of good information on admission processes, but also bursaries, scholarships, and financial aid that might be available.
The next question is from Kajal. She's asking, is CSR integrated into financial measurement, reporting, and goal setting or decision making?
Oh yeah, I definitely think so. It should be, isn't it? Because
Right.
you know you get involved in CSR for certain reasons, but what actually fuels that work or supports that work is money, right?
Right.
And so there has to be accountability. In fact, a greater level of accountability than what there is probably in many parts of the world, because this money is supposed to go to solving a serious problem in our society, or is supposed to go to a vulnerable person or a population. So from my point of view, individuals and organizations involved in this kind of work need to have a high level of transparency and accountability. And that's why some of us get very excited about the potential for blockchain to fundamentally change this giving space, because there is no middle people, right? There's a protocol in place, there's a smart contract in place, and basically the money goes from the person giving to the person who needs to get it, and the whole transaction is public, because that's what blockchain is, right? It's digital information in a block sitting in a public database, the chain, in very simple terms. So there's a high level of transparency, there's a high level of accountability, and it's basically financial decentralization. So it doesn't matter whether you're dealing with digital money or whether you're dealing with real money. At the end of the day, you have to be transparent, you have to be accountable, you have to report out, and you've got to make sure that every single penny goes to where it's supposed to go.
Uh, we have a next question. If we talk about CSR in big corporates, we have one very big advantage of a big employee strength with different skills and capacities. How can we engage them in more impactful way for CSR? Is there a strong model for the same? So this is a similar question even I had in terms of, I see many companies in India, they are doing CSR activities, but it only gets limited to the CSR team. or the leaders and the CSR team, but it doesn't really trickle down to rest of the employees who might have capabilities of engaging with the people in a more meaningful way. So how can we get it on a grassroots level for the employees so that even they can start contributing in their own capacity?
Yeah, I think one of the missed opportunities in lots of organizations, and I saw that while I was in India, the company that I work for, Newgen Knowledge Works, actually the CSR work and the corporate giving work was part and parcel of employee engagement. We used uh, the whole involvement in CSR, as a mechanism sometimes to basically build teams, to inspire people to continue to stay with the company and to also get involved in actually giving. And one of the missed opportunities is actually companies not realizing that if you want a high performing uh, group of employees and you want a very engaged workforce, uh, what you offer people in the company needs to be more than tasks and projects and deadlines and a paycheck, because at the end of the day, uh, people don't make a connection and they don't want to give 20, 30 years of their life to an organization unless they feel a deep connection. And often we feel the deep connection because there's purpose, there's a value in our existence within the company context. So CSR, in my opinion, should never be restricted to just one team. There could be a team that's accountable for it, is responsible for it, very similar to the accounts team or the training team. But at the end of the day, this should be a corporate activity. So I think it'd be very interesting for you to take a look at that Imagine Canada report that I talked about on the Canadian slide. And it talks about how companies are trying to change the DNA of the organization by getting all employees to be part and parcel of this giving. So this this nonprofit I talked about earlier, United Way of the Lower Mainland. So I'm the lead and responsible for the workplace campaign at the university. So every year we have a campaign and we raise about $100,000 or more to give to United Way of Canada, to United Way of Lower Mainland, sorry, to basically carry out their mandate. And everybody in the institution at SFU, students, employees, faculty members, everyone gets involved in the United Way campaign, which we will kick off this year in the summer. And then by March 31st, we try to reach our goal of over $100,000. And it really brings us together as an SFU community. And there's many such examples. So I strongly encourage you, if you're involved in CSR or your other colleagues or friends are, to really challenge them in a good way and ask them, why can this be something that all of us participate
Right. Uh, I don't see any more questions. For all the people who are attending the webinar, in case you have any more questions, Shobhana has already given her details through which you can get in touch with her. I'm sure she'll be more than happy to help and solve your questions on the personal level as well. Having said that, thank you so much, Shobhana, for taking out time. I know it's a little late in the evening, but thank you so much for joining us for this session today. And thank you all the participants for being so attentive and asking relevant questions and getting engaged into the conversation. Thank you so much for that. Any last words before we log off, Shona?
Yeah, I just noticed there was a question that got added here. You discussed the global context of many issues. And in
Sorry,
your
my bad, I
opinion,
missed it.
yeah, no worries. I think it just came in. So you discussed the global context on many issues. And in your opinion, what role do youth and students have to play? Such an important question, right? If you look at India, for instance, the young, right, individuals who are in the younger age group make up a huge part of the Indian population. And they're the future, like in with any other part of the world. And the future of our planet, the future of what happens to humanity, how we are going to go about solving today's problems, need everyone to get involved, especially students and youth. But I think the youth and students have such an incredibly important job to do and a role to play because they have come into the world as digital natives. They have come into a context where a lot of things are not the same as it was for their grandparents or for their parents. And these individuals at a very young age are huge risk takers. So the classic example of Buterin, 26 years old, co-founder of Ethereum, an extremely financially uh, secure person who also gives back tremendously to society. There are hundreds and thousands of those examples in India and in different parts of the world. If you look at the fight for democracy in many parts of the world, it's students and youth that are leading it. So youth and students have a couple of important things they can do. One is that challenge the status quo in a good way and respectfully communicate it to people in power that maybe the time has come for change. And this is why things need to change, and this is how perhaps things could change. But also, they have a huge advantage when it comes to disruptive technologies. For instance, how is it possible for young people to get involved in, say, in an organization where grandpa is working and grandson is also working, right? Or mom is working but reporting to her niece who is half her age. So we have multi generations working in a workforce, and we no longer should be stubborn and egoistic and think mentoring is one way, where anyone with silver strands gets to mentor somebody else. No, reverse mentoring is equally important. So young people can do so many things to make this world and our lives better. And I hope they get very involved in this space of giving. And thanks to everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. I think, Dr. Preeti, you can speak about this postgraduate program and the limitations, the message that you have spoken. With Sobhana personally, I think she'll be able to give you a better answer through a one-on-one conversation. Having said that, thank you so much all for joining in today's session. Have a great week ahead. Thank you so much, Sobhana, for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care and stay well.
Thank you, Sobhana.
Thank you, Muralidhar. Pleasure.